Focus question. Analyze the factors that influenced the development of East Asia. At the dawn of the 16th century, the East Asian bubble of isolation popped with Portuguese ships reaching China. At first, Europeans were not welcomed in China and Japan. However, by the mid-century, they were able to set limited trade with the region. At first, the Portuguese and Spanish dominated East Asian trade with trading posts in Manila, Macau, Taiwan, etc. Eventually, the Dutch East India Company took control of the majority of trade by taking control of other European trading posts and pleasing the rulers of China and Japan. This newfound trade between the East and the West was followed by religious groups who sought to expand. Groups such as the Franciscans and Dominicans tried converting people, but in the end, it was the Jesuits that found the most success and influence. In China, Jesuits were respected by imperial rule and were appealing to the elite. Thanks to their mastery of Western knowledge and leniency in Christian teaching towards Chinese Confucianism, members were often granted high positions. For example, Matteo Ricci, a Jesuit leader, found himself in many imperial positions. Across the ocean, Japan saw the influx of many Jesuits as well. At first, the Jesuits found many converts amongst the poor, but they weren't as well received among the elites of Japan as they were amongst the Chinese elite. Thus, the Christian presence in Japan was short-lived. By 1614, Christianity was outlawed and nearly eradicated. In comparison, China had a lasting Jesuit presence until the 18th century. The China that the Europeans arrived in was a waning empire. The cultural and industrial glories of the early Ming had initially continued into the early 1500s. Unfortunately, climate change from the Little Ice Age led to food shortages and famine. Disease plagued the empire. The economy experienced severe inflation due to the influx of silver. On the other hand, Japan saw the opposite of China. Instead of weakening, it unified. The islands had been controlled by regional lords, the daimyos, and its system of feudalism was important. Samurai would work for daimyos in exchange for land and protection. In Japan, three warlords, who were Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, managed to conquer most of the islands of Japan. The death of Nobunaga left Hideyoshi in control. Hideyoshi then led a 160,000-man invasion into Korea in 1592, which sparked the Imjin War. The invasion had various reasons, such as seeking to keep daimyos busy, dominate trade, and most importantly, conquer China. Korea was highly unprepared for the invasion and suffered many losses at first. However, with the assistance of the Ming government and advanced naval technologies, they managed to fight to a stalemate, and Hideyoshi called back his forces on his deathbed in 1598. In order to provide assistance to the Koreans, the Ming government had to rely on the Manchu people to fight for them. However, at the end of the Imjin War, the Manchus turned on the Ming. Exploiting the weakened Ming state, they conquered them in 1644 and established the Qing Empire. China was not conquered by the Japanese, but it was left in a state of devastation. Almost 80% of farming land was destroyed, and nearly 20% of the population was killed. After the war, continuous Manchu invasions led the Choson king to submitting to the Qing dynasty. This caused close ties with Japan and Korea, and as a result, Korea became a model Confucian state, using civil service examinations for government officials. This also led to the young bond class, which were the only ones allowed to work in the government. The Confucian model created changes in social hierarchy, creating a patriarchy in Korea. After the failure of the invasion and the death of Hideyoshi, the remaining warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603, along with the new administrative capital, Edo, which is present-day Tokyo. The shogunate promoted the economic well-being of Japan. Roads to Edo were erected along with trade centers. It also required the daimyo, who still retained their autonomy, to visit Edo frequently. The travels of the daimyos were followed by commercial traffic via roads and maritime transport. Rice was the primary item of exchange. Lords and peasants would be paid in rice and would then convert them into cash. The peace of the Tokugawa era resulted in the transition of the samurai class from warriors to bureaucrats and became customers of merchants that dealt fine luxuries. Manufacturing and fine arts artisanship of silk, porcelain, pottery, and other luxuries gave the merchant families enormous wealth. In the 1700s, population growth strained the imperial centers, but provided remote provinces with more settlements and economic growth. The decentralization of the shogunate led to the merchant families having overwhelming power over the economy and the status of the elite and samurai class, who in turn depended on the merchants. The transition of powers from the old elite to the merchants prompted social changes as well. Old militaristic ways clashed with the new civil ones. One story about the social changes during this time period from a militaristic to civil society is called The 47 Ronin. This book was about rogue samurais avenging their master by killing a senior minister. However, they confessed the killing to the shogunate, who sentenced them to death but allowed them to die the traditional samurai way, seppuku, a ritual suicide. It shows the balance between the samurai values and new values of justice for upholding civil law. During this time period, the Qing dynasty was rapidly expanding. The economy was starting to blossom. At first, the markets of the Qing dynasty were facing hardships and a large portion of the population was unable to pay its taxes. After many wars, the population was left almost incapable of paying its taxes, but the government found a solution. The people were given incentives to contribute to the market growth and resettle the land devastated by peasant rebellions. Also, the government forced merchants to open new mines in poor areas to help the peasants earn a living. As a result, there was a steady increase in wealth and more people were able to pay their taxes. The money received from taxes was used to hire laborers and support the expeditions of merchants. China's economy during the Qing dynasty was still largely a farming economy. 80% of the population lived in the countryside at the end of the Qing dynasty, and most people had an agriculturally based lifestyle. This agricultural lifestyle led to a huge amount of markets, and most of the population lived within a day's journey of a market town and could take some of their produce to the market and become involved in marketing activities. However, as the population boomed, the economy couldn't support it, and it also strained the environment. This led to the population to migrate for low-paying jobs to support their families. Begging, prostitution, and theft increased all over town, and peasant rebellions started to rise up on the borders of the empire. The Qing could not control the empire any longer, and its economic boom took a downturn, and the fall of the Qing dynasty began. Kangxi was an emperor of the Qing dynasty. He was largely successful in his rule since he greatly expanded China's borders. During his rule, he also wrote a set of laws known as the Sacred Edicts. Number 1. Esteem most highly filial piety and brotherly submission in order to give due importance to human moral relations. Number 2. Behave with generosity toward your kindred in order to illustrate harmony and benignity. Number 3. Cultivate peace and concord in your neighborhoods in order to prevent quarrels and litigations. Here, the document reflects the Confucian values of Qing society. Number 7. Foster colleges and schools in order to give the training of scholars a proper start. Number 10. Attend to proper callings in order to stabilize the people's sense of dedication to their work. Number 11. Instruct sons and younger brothers in order to prevent them from doing what is wrong. These two sections show again the Confucian teachings by describing the importance of education and also the patriarchal system in the society. Number 12. Put a stop to false accusations in order to protect the honest and good. Number 13. Warn against sheltering deserters in order to avoid being involved in their punishment. Number 14. Promptly remit your taxes in order to avoid being pressed for payment. Number 15. Combine in collective security groups, 保家, in order to put an end to theft and robbery. The sections show how Kangxi provided order to society, making sure that the citizens were safe and making sure that the government can run properly. As a result, this document helped provide structure and ensure that the Qing dynasty would last for future generations. The European trade with Asia was the first step towards greater interaction around the globe. For example, Here is a picture of Dutch trade during the 1650s. Similarly, interactions between countries around the world today are highly connected through globalization. For example, just as how the Silk Road and maritime trade connected the East and the West, the internet connects our globe today, as shown in this picture. Another similarity is in the censorship of ideas within China. During Qing China, trade was limited to certain cities. Similarly, today's internet in China is censored as well to prevent the spread of ideas that the Chinese government feels would undermine their rule. By limiting the spread of ideas into China, it can therefore retain more central power.
This film was written by, directed by, and edited by Addison Chan, Dennis Dang, Kyle Hua, and Yash Tanna.